Claire had always thought she knew exactly how life would flow. She had raised her daughter Emily with care, love, and patience, guiding her through childhood, teenage struggles, and the nervous excitement of first dates. She had imagined Emily's wedding day dozens of times, smiling as her daughter walked down the aisle, her hands lightly holding a bouquet, glowing with happiness. But tonight, as Claire prepared the house for a quiet wedding anniversary dinner for Emily and her husband David, she felt a strange tension in the air, a subtle shift that made her heart race for reasons she could not yet explain. The house smelled faintly of fresh flowers and home-cooked food. Claire had spent hours ensuring every detail was perfect. The silverware polished, the napkins folded neatly, the candles placed evenly across the dining table. Everything reflected warmth, comfort, and celebration. Yet when David walked in with a bottle of wine, smiling politely as always, Claire noticed a change. His usual friendly, relaxed demeanor carried something different tonight. His eyes lingered on her longer than usual, and for a fleeting moment, the warmth of his smile seemed to hold more meaning than it should. Claire quickly shook her head, telling herself she was imagining it. He was her daughter's husband, after all. There was no reason for anything unusual. Emily was in the kitchen, laughing as she tried to plate a small dessert she had baked herself, and the sound of her joy should have eased Claire's nerves. But the tension stayed. David glanced toward her again, quietly, almost shyly, with a look Claire couldn't place. It was not disrespectful, not flirtatious in a clear sense, but it carried a weight, a depth that made her stomach tighten. She forced a smile and turned her attention back to the final touches of the table, trying to focus on the evening, on making everything perfect. Dinner began as planned. Emily chatted enthusiastically about her work and her latest projects, and David shared funny stories from his office. Claire joined the conversation, keeping her tone light, laughter easy, trying to keep the atmosphere cheerful. But she could feel it. Every time she spoke, David's gaze found her, and his eyes seemed to search for something hidden in her expression. She quickly looked away, embarrassed by the thought that she was noticing too much, reading too deeply into a glance. After the main course, Emily suggested they play charades, her voice bright and playful. Claire hesitated. Something inside her warned her that tonight was different, that the usual ease she felt around David had shifted into something charged, delicate, and unspoken. Still, she followed Emily into the living room. David joined, setting the cards on the table, a polite smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. The game started, and for a few moments, everything felt normal. Emily was laughing, shouting guesses, cheering for David when he acted out silly scenarios. Claire laughed along, letting herself enjoy the moment. But even in the middle of the laughter, she noticed it. David's glances were not just casual. Every time she spoke or moved, his eyes found her. They lingered a beat too long, a subtle intensity she could not explain. Then, during one round, Emily reached for a card and David's hand brushed hers. The contact was fleeting, accidental or so it seemed, but their eyes met for a single, intense moment. Claire's heart jumped. She looked away, forcing a smile at Emily, trying to hide the sudden rush of emotion she felt. There was something in his gaze that startled her, that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. She chastised herself silently. This was her daughter's husband, a man she had always respected, and yet tonight the boundaries she had never questioned before seemed fragile. The game continued, but the energy had changed. What was meant to be playful now carried tension, unspoken words hanging between Claire and David. Emily, blissfully unaware, laughed and cheered, her excitement contagious. Claire focused on her daughter, wanting to push the feelings aside to remind herself that family meant everything. But deep down, she knew she could not ignore the subtle shift in David's behavior. After charades, Emily went to fetch old photo albums from her bedroom, leaving Claire and David alone in the living room. The silence was heavy, but not awkward. It was a silence filled with meaning, with awareness. David shifted on the sofa, clearing his throat. "Claire," he began, voice quieter than usual. I don't know why, but tonight feels different." Claire's heart skipped a beat. Different? How? She asked cautiously, unsure if she even wanted the answer. David hesitated, eyes briefly glancing toward the hallway where Emily's laughter had just faded. "I can't explain it. It's just, I feel more aware of you tonight. I don't want to be disrespectful. Meal Lee means everything to me, but I feel something. I don't know what to call it." Claire swallowed hard. A mix of emotions flooding her: confusion, fear, curiosity, and an undeniable pull she couldn't ignore. She wanted to retreat, to close the door on this strange feeling. But a part of her felt drawn to him, too. Before she could respond, Emily called from down the hall, her voice breaking the moment. "Mom, David, come look at this old picture." David smiled at her in a warm, family-friendly way, and Claire felt both relief and disappointment. The intensity of the previous moment receded, but it left behind a residue of tension she couldn't shake. They followed Emily to her bedroom, where old photographs lay scattered across the bed. Laughter and nostalgia filled the room. Claire forced herself to focus on family, on memories, and on the joy of seeing her daughter so happy. Yet even amid the laughter, Claire noticed the smallest gestures. The way David lingered slightly longer than necessary when helping her arrange a photo, the way his eyes caught hers for the briefest moment, a flash of something she could not name. She forced herself to ignore it, telling herself it was nothing, that she was reading too much into ordinary gestures. Later, back in the living room, the three of them sat together, flipping through the albums. Emily laughed at a picture of herself as a child, making exaggerated faces, and David joined in her laughter. Claire smiled, feeling a pang of bittersweet emotion. The family connection was strong, and yet tonight had subtly shifted the invisible boundaries that had always felt secure. After Emily left to make herself a cup of tea, David remained seated near Claire. He seemed reluctant to move, as if he too felt the tension in the air. "Claire," he said quietly, "I don't want to make things uncomfortable, but I need to say it. I feel something tonight, something I can't ignore. I don't want to betray Emily, and I would never act on it, but I can't pretend it isn't there." Claire's chest tightened. She felt the same undeniable pull, the same recognition of something neither of them could fully understand. I feel it, too," she admitted softly, "but we have to be careful. Emily is our priority. We can't let this go further." David nodded, his expression serious yet gentle. "I know. I just needed you to know. I couldn't keep it to myself without feeling dishonest." The moment lingered, quiet but intense. It was an unspoken agreement, a mutual recognition of feelings they could not act on, a tension that existed in the small spaces between them. Claire's heart raced, a mix of longing, fear, and wonder. She forced herself to smile, to focus on the family, to ignore the pull that was impossible to erase, as David eventually stood to leave. Claire felt a strange emptiness in the room. The tension had not vanished, had simply settled into a quiet undercurrent, subtle but persistent. She realized, with both fear and fascination, that something had changed tonight. Something fragile, delicate, and unspoken had entered their lives, and she had no idea where it would lead. Walking David to the door, she found herself caught in a moment of hesitation. He looked at her one last time before stepping outside. And in that glance, Claire saw everything: the respect, the restraint, and the undeniable awareness of what was there between them. She closed the door behind him, her hand lingering on the handle longer than necessary. Claire leaned against the door, heart pounding, mind racing. She tried to reassure herself that this was just a fleeting feeling, a momentary lapse in ordinary life. Yet deep down, she knew it was more than that. It was a connection that defied simple explanation, a spark in the middle of her otherwise predictable world. She understood that this night would stay with her, a memory that would linger, shaping her emotions in ways she could not yet see as she returned to the living room. She caught herself staring at the empty sofa where David had sat. The house was quiet now, Emily happily lost in her own world in the bedroom. And yet Claire felt a pulse of tension still hanging in the air. Something had shifted, something delicate and impossible to ignore. And she knew that the evening was far from over, not in her mind, not in the quiet moments of awareness that had made her heart race. Tonight had opened a door, and Claire had a feeling she could never close it again. The days after that evening felt strange to Claire. She tried to convince herself that what happened was just a fleeting moment, a misinterpretation of glances and gestures. She went about her routines, grocery shopping, tidying the house, making calls, but the memory of David's gaze, the subtle intensity in his eyes, lingered, refusing to fade. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the moment in the living room, the way his hand had brushed hers, the unspoken words hanging between them. The quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted. Emily was oblivious to any of this. She spoke cheerfully about work, her friends, and plans for the weekend, leaving Claire to smile politely, hiding the storm of emotions brewing inside her. David, too, carried himself normally when he visited, polite, courteous, considerate. Yet every time he entered the house, that quiet tension returned, like an invisible thread pulling them together, even when both knew it should not exist. Claire felt trapped in her own emotions. She loved Emily, adored her daughter's happiness, and respected David as a husband. But there was a part of her that couldn't deny the attraction, the connection that had sparked that night. One afternoon, Claire was in the kitchen arranging flowers in a vase when David walked in to grab a cup of coffee. Their eyes met, and for a brief second time seemed to slow. He gave her a soft smile, but there was something different in a quiet wait, an acknowledgement of the unspoken feelings between them. Claire's heart thumped, an unfamiliar warmth rising in her chest. "Hi," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hi," he replied, his tone gentle, almost hesitant. He reached for the sugar, their hands brushing ever so slightly. Claire's fingers tingled at the contact. She looked down at the counter, pretending to be busy, but she could feel his presence the way it filled the room, charged and electric. Without a word being spoken, David cleared his throat. "Claire, I know we shouldn't be having this conversation, but I can't ignore it anymore. I feel something for you, something I can't explain, and I need to be honest." Claire swallowed hard, emotions swirling inside her. She wanted to protest, to tell him it was wrong, to close the door on this tension before it could grow. Yet the truth was undeniable. I feel it too," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling, "but we can't act on it. Emily, she's your wife. We have to be careful." David nodded, eyes searching hers. I know. I don't want to hurt Emily, and I don't want to disrespect you. I just needed you to know that I can't pretend tonight didn't happen, that we can just ignore it." Claire felt her chest tighten. She had always been a woman who valued honesty, yet the honesty now brought a mix of relief and pain. There was comfort in knowing he felt the same, but there was fear too. The fear of crossing invisible boundaries that should never be crossed. She forced herself to smile, though it felt fragile. "We'll manage this," she said softly. "We have to, for Emily's sake." Over the next few days, Claire found herself noticing small things, David's glances lingering too long when Emily wasn't around, his voice softening when they spoke alone, a subtle brush of hands that seemed accidental but carried meaning. Every encounter was a careful dance, a balancing act between propriety and the undeniable pull between them. Claire began to understand that the tension was no longer confined to one night. It was a presence in their shared spaces, delicate yet unyielding. One evening, while Emily was at work, David stopped by to drop off some documents she had left at the office. They met in the hallway, a casual exchange that carried a current of unspoken feelings. The air felt thick, heavy with what neither of them could name. Claire felt her heart race as she handed him the papers, her fingers brushing, sending a familiar jolt through her. "Thank you," David said softly, holding her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. I I hope this isn't awkward for you." Claire shook her head, struggling to keep her composure. "No, not awkward, just complicated." Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet it carried everything she felt: longing, confusion, and a quiet acknowledgement that the bond between them was growing stronger despite reason. David nodded. Complicated is exactly the word. He paused, as if debating whether to speak. "I know we have to be careful, but sometimes it's hard to act normal when there's something like this between us." Claire felt a pang in her chest. His words mirrored her own emotions. She wanted to tell him that she felt the same way, that the tension had been building in her too, but fear restrained her. Fear of Emily, fear of boundaries, fear of crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. She nodded instead, letting silence speak for them both. As the days passed, the quiet tension grew. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was persistent, like a gentle storm brewing under calm skies. Claire found herself thinking about David at odd moments, imagining conversations, replaying gestures, noticing the way he carried himself. It was an emotional storm she could not contain, a quiet longing that both scared and thrilled her. She loved her daughter and respected her family, but she couldn't deny that something powerful had awakened that night. Then one afternoon, while organizing old photo albums, she found herself laughing softly at a picture of Emily as a child. The doorbell rang, and it was David, returning a framed photograph Emily had left at the office. They stood together in the hallway, holding the frame, the silence stretching long enough to feel intimate. Claire felt the familiar stir of tension, that undeniable pull. He handed her the photo. Their hands brushing once again. This time, intentionally or not, it was impossible to tell. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was recognition in his gaze, a quiet understanding, a longing neither of them could speak aloud. Claire felt a tear slip down her cheek, not of guilt, but of emotion, of connection, of the beauty of a moment that could never fully belong to her. David whispered, almost to himself, "I don't know what the future holds, but I can't pretend tonight didn't happen." Claire's heart raced. She wanted to respond, to say something that could anchor them, to acknowledge the bond between them. Yet words failed her. Instead, she let him go, watching as he stepped back, leaving her with a mixture of relief and despair. It was a quiet ache, a longing that could not be acted upon, a desire restrained by loyalty and love for Emily. Days turned into weeks, and every encounter was measured, careful, a balancing act between propriety and desire. David remained the polite, attentive husband, but Claire noticed the subtle signs. The way he lingered near her when Emily wasn't looking, the way his tone softened in private, the way his eyes searched hers for recognition. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. She could not predict when these moments would appear, nor could she control the pull she felt toward him. One evening, Claire found herself sitting alone in the living room, thinking about the night that had changed everything. She traced her fingers along the edge of the coffee table, her mind filled with memories of that evening, the game of charades, the accidental brush of hands, the charged glances. She knew that moment had opened a door in her heart, one that could never truly close. The doorbell rang, and she felt her heart leap. It was David, stopping by to drop off something small Emily had requested. They exchanged polite greetings, but the moment carried tension, heavy and quiet. David lingered at the doorway, as if unsure whether to leave or stay, and Claire felt the familiar pull of something unspoken. "Claire," he said softly, "I know this is complicated, impossible, even, but I need to be honest. Think about that night more than I should. Claire nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. I think about it too, she admitted, but we have to stay careful. We have responsibilities, and we cannot risk what Emily has. He gave a small, understanding smile. I know, I just needed you to hear it. The words lingered between them, quiet and heavy. Claire realized that these moments, the glances, the touches, the unspoken words, were now a part of their lives. Something had been awakened that could not be ignored. Something delicate and impossible, existing in the quiet spaces of everyday life. David eventually left, stepping back into the night. Claire closed the door, leaning against it, heart pounding. She understood now that the connection between them would remain, subtle and persistent, a quiet longing that neither could act upon but both could feel. It was a secret tension, a bond that defied logic and reason, and she knew it would shape her life in ways she could not yet foresee. Sitting alone, Claire realized one truth. Some connections are undeniable. It's impossible to ignore, and sometimes life tests us with feelings that cannot be acted upon. She loved Emily, respected her family, and knew she must honor the boundaries set by loyalty and love. Yet, she also knew that the nights, the glances, and the unspoken words would remain with her. A delicate emotional thread woven into the fabric of her life. And as she whispered into the quiet room, Claire acknowledged the reality she could not change. This feeling would never leave, and neither would he.